Poker is all about exploiting your opponents and avoiding mistakes yourself. Some of my viewers sent in these hand histories to check whether they made a mistake, and boy did I find mistakes. So if you want to see whether you would have avoided these errors, keep watching. The first hand is a classic hand reading example, and it shows how important hand reading is. There is a raise to 2 big blinds in the cutoff. We have pocket queens on the button, definitely going to 3-bet. We'll make it a little bit too big here with 9 big blinds, but whatever, it's not a big deal. And villain calls. Flop comes king 3 deuce with 2 clubs. He checks to us, and we normally have a pretty standard range bet here, so a small bet, maybe quarter pot or so, max third pot. But with pocket queens precisely, I don't mind checking back. It's okay, you can do that exploitatively and you won't lose too much EV. So this is what we do in this spot. Now the 9 of clubs come in and villain checks again. So at this point, I mean, we probably have the best hand, so we could start putting some money in there, especially because we have the queen of clubs, but don't expect to get too much value out of it. But yeah, you can definitely go for a bet here. If you go, keep it quite small. This is what Hero did, made it 6.2 and got called, so I think that is all fine. And now we have a very interesting river, the jack of clubs completing the flush, the 4 flush, and villain checks to us again. So at this point, how certain are we that we have the best hand? I would say I'm almost certain, because we only lose to the ace of clubs, and it's not very likely that he has that with this way of play. So I think here we do have to go for value. However, we have to think how much to bet. And the problem is we lose to the ace of clubs, the king of clubs is there, we have the queen of clubs, the jack of clubs is there, and the 9 of clubs is there. So the 10 of clubs is pretty much the only hand that we could get value from. If it's a flush, maybe pocket 8s with the 8 of clubs, and even the 10 of clubs would only be pocket 10s with a 10 of clubs. But maybe he has a slow played set somehow where the run out was bad, or he has a king, so he might call us. But you can't go too big here and expect to get called by much. So that's why I would make it quite small, maybe third pot or so, and maximum half pot, because I just don't think that you can get called by much worse. Hero goes 2/3, which I think is a bit too much, and now this happens. We get jammed on. So, time to think about it. I think Hero snap called in this spot because he had the second nuts, and you just don't fold that. But you have to consider what villain has in this spot. So, what is he saying that he has? Is he saying that he has a hand like king queen or ace king or even pocket kings? And I strongly doubt that. He would never check jam with that hand. So it means that he either has the ace of clubs, because also he's not saying that he's jamming with the 10 of clubs or the 8 of clubs. So he either has the ace of clubs or he has a bluff. Now, what bluffs does he have? Well, there are no natural bluffs. He called us on the turn, so he would have to turn something into a bluff. What would that be? Top pair, like ace king, king queen? Very unlikely that he would do that. A 9, well, why did he even call that? It's possible, but how many 9s does he have? 10-9, 9-8 suited? I just don't really think so. And then you have to look at his stats. Okay, admittedly, we only have 45 hands against him. However, he is a 13-11, so he's a super tight and not super aggressive player either. So that means that once he takes this line, I just don't see what bluffs he could have, and he's not doing it for value with anything worse than we have. So although we have the second nuts in this hand, this is just a fold, unfortunately. And as I said, Hero snapped him off and was shown the bad news with the ace of clubs. This next one is quite different, but there's also a concept that applies to many of you, I think. So here this looks very big, 500, 500, but it was played in a different currency, so this is more like 5-5 in US dollars. Anyway, there is a limp. We have King Jack offsuit in the cutoff, happy to isolate. It's quite big. We go 12 times the big blind. I would make it slightly less probably, but we have position and it's okay. We get called by the big blind and the limper. Flop is ace king 3, and this is a board where a lot of players make a mistake because they think that they should range bet it. It has too high cards, and I just don't think, especially against two players, that you really completely want to range bet it. Now, against one player, it's fine to range bet, but not. I wouldn't even call it range bet. I would just say go small with a good ace, or a nutted hand, or a bluff. But here we have second pair, so we're never gonna get anything better to fold. An ace will just not fold here, or a set or two pair or anything like that, and we will not get called by much weaker either. So maybe once in a blue moon, queen 10, queen jack, jack 10 might call one street, but I'm not so sure even about that. So I would just check behind, but instead Hero went for a third pot bet. He got called by the big blind and the limper folded. The rest of the hand is quite boring. It just checks through. And then on the river we get to show down and we lose to king queen. So this is kind of probably the worst hand that he would call with there. Maybe he would call with king 10, and then you could say that you make some money against that. But I would play this one very passively, and I would rather call on the turn if he makes it small, because that could be a bluff, although it's unlikely, but I think that has more chances of being successful than betting myself on the flop. Okay, this next one's also very interesting. Now, once again, the cutoff raises. We have king queen offsuit on the button, definitely going to 3-bet this time. I'm happy with the size as well. And now, surprisingly, the small blind cold call. So what's his range at this point? Usually pocket pairs, especially something like 8s through jacks, maybe even queens. Sometimes they do it with kings, maybe some suited broadways. So we have to be careful when we face this sort of action. And the other player also calls, so 3 ways to a flop. Queen 4-3 with 2 spades. Pretty good board for us. I'm happy to c-bet this one small because we can still get called by jacks or 10s by this player, or both players really, or 9s or 8s, or a flush draw, or queen jack or queen 10. So plenty of weaker hands there. Definitely going for a bet, and this is what Hero did. 9 big blinds into a 27, third pot, and then this happened. Small blind now decides to raise, and now alarm bells start ringing, and the other player folds. And the thing is, like, we said what range we expected from him, so that would be 9s, 10s, jacks, maybe ace jack, ace queen, ace 10 suited, pocket queens maybe. Possibly he could even have smaller pairs. When he raises us here, what does he do that with? It's a lot of money, so especially because we're very deep. We started the hand 200 big blinds deep. So what could he have? I don't think that he has a hand like 10s or jacks at this point. That hand would probably just call, or if it raises once in a blue moon, I don't think it would make it that big. So then what do we have? A bluff catcher. So yeah, he might do this with spades, which is something a lot of players would do. So I don't mind a call at this point, although it's already quite marginal. But look what Hero does. We didn't even talk about this. Hero just jams. And this I don't like at all, because we now allow our opponent to play perfectly. If he had a draw, I mean, yeah, maybe he'll chase that draw and he'll get the wrong pot odds, then he would make a mistake again. But we allow him to say, okay, I tried my luck with ace jack of spades, now I'm folding for another, what is it, 170 big blinds almost. So if he has a set, or anything that beats us really, he will basically never fold here. Like maybe ace queen, but I don't even think ace queen, but ace queen could be a hand that we could get to fold, but that would be the only one, and that would mean that we're turning our hand into a bluff. And I don't know if Villain wanted to turn his hand into a bluff here, or if he just thought he has top pair, so he'll just go all in. And this is the mistake. If we think that this guy could have bluffs in his range, then let him bluff. Yes, he might get there on the turn or on the river, but by jamming here, we allow him to play perfectly, and this is exactly what we don't want to do. We want him to make mistakes, not allow him to play perfectly. And in this case, he actually called with ace-queen, which I thought was the only hand that we might get to fold, and we lose 200 big blinds in a 3-bet pot because we completely overplayed our hand. So what I would have done is I would have just called there on the flop, sorry, and then on the turn when the flush comes in, if Villain continues betting, I might even be out at that point, because then really what do we beat? The draw came in as well, and you wouldn't do this with any weaker pair than ours, so then we would have been able to get away from this hand with only losing around 36 or so big blinds in total. But instead we gave them all our money. So here we have a 500 1000, so I think this is something like 510 or 25, I'm not entirely sure in dollars, but it doesn't really matter. We open 9-7 suited in the cutoff, and I think in passive games where we don't expect to get a lot of 3 bets, I think this is absolutely fine. The size 4 times the big blind from the cutoff also looks fine, even though we don't have the best hand on the planet. But we get called in 2 spaces, it checks to us, and this is similar to the previous hand where the same player bet the king jack on ace king x on the flop, and here again against 2 players we have bottom pair. I mean, I like this one better than the other one with a king because we can get a little bit of protection, although I'm not really sure how much, because if he has 2 cards above the 7, that means that he'll either have a pair or he will have a straight draw. So I just don't think that we can get anything to fold. Yes, maybe we can get some value from king 10, from 10-9 and so on, but those hands might even check raise us and then we have to fold. So I think I would just take a free card rather than c-bet, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, and at least Hero went quite small with a 4th pot here, quarter pot, so I think that's fine, and the big blind calls. Now we have the 9 on the turn, giving us 2 pair, which is great, but not as great as it seems, because now some straights came in, the king 10 and the 10-8, and if he had a queen or a jack on the flop, it's possible that the 9 will also have helped him, because he could easily have queen 9 or jack 9. In these games they might call the offsuit variants as well, so I'm not super thrilled about it. That said, I would still go for value, and this is what Hero does, half pot. I'm happy with that, and we get called. And now on this river, at this point, should we go for thin value or not? As I said, it was already thin on the turn, but then again, it really depends on your opponent, because if you think that he would always check raise 2 pair or a straight on the turn, then you can go for thin value on this river. So whilst I was skeptical on the turn, but I still said it's good to go for value, here I actually think, but it's very player dependent, but I do think that we can get away with a thin value bet, even just below half pot, and still get called by a hand like king queen, potentially king jack, queen 10. But we have to be aware that we will sometimes lose to a better two pair if the player is not the kind who would check raise that on the flop or on the turn. Hero did go for half pot, and now this is exactly what happened. We get raised. And although we only need to be good around, what is that? We have to call 65 to win 185, so it's 3-1. We have to be good 25% of the time, roughly. This, I think, is under bluffed, because what bluffs would he really have at this point? The straight came in, there was no flush draw, and it's unlikely that a player will turn a pair into a bluff, and this is what he would have to do. So I think this one was played very well by Hero. He folded in this instance, and I think, although I don't know what villain had, I think this was a very good fold. Okay, this is a very interesting hand with pocket kings, and this looks like a 15-15, but it's not. So what happened here was that Hero straddled on the button, and then the small blind raised to 15. The big blind called the 15, and the under the gun plus one player jammed for his remaining $47, and now it's up to Hero on the button. You could play it two ways. You could either raise here or you could just call. Now if you call, you're going four ways to a flop most likely with one player all in, so it's a bit tricky. If there had only been one other player in the pot, I would definitely just call. Maybe he would even make the mistake to raise again to try to get me out, or if he calls, I'm happy with kings to play basically a heads-up pot, because I don't really care too much about the $47 by the under the gun plus one player. Against two players, we could make it a bit bigger, especially if we think that we get called by a lot there. So I could go either way, and Hero went to 100, basically min-clicking this one, and we do get called by both players. Now, the flop is really pretty terrible for us. That said, there's 347 in the middle. We only have 167 behind. I mean, whatever happens at this point, I'm going to put my money in. I'm not going to fold pocket kings now. And this is the problem that you create such a small stack to pot ratio when you raise to 100 and you get called by two players. But we don't even get to think whether we would like to c-bet this one, because now the small blind bets 150. The big blind calls the 150, and at this point we'll just have to go all in. I think I made a mistake here by just saying calling. I think this should have been an all-in, but whatever. And in the end, we lose to pocket aces by the big blind, and the under the gun plus one had pocket tens. And I know the viewer who sent me this hand asked me if he should have gotten away with his kings here, and the answer is absolutely not. You have to sometimes go broke with kings against aces, and you see, like, the small blind, whatever he had, he didn't even have pocket queens because he would have shipped this pot. So whatever he had, he called, and then he jammed on the flop with whatever he had. So he definitely made a big mistake there. And yes, in this case, the big blind happened to slow play aces, but if he had fast played his aces, you would still have given him all your money. There is just no way to get away from this one. Not with this dynamic, but not in general. You were not even 200 big blinds deep. Let's rewind what we started with. We started the hand with 267, which, given that it was a straddle pot, yeah, there's not even 100 big blinds, 100 straddles. So whatever, just don't sweat it. This is absolutely fine to go broke with kings against aces. This is another interesting one, this time with pocket aces, and this hero also thought that he might have made a mistake here. So hijack raises, we 3-bet aces on the button to 40. Now this is a little bit bigger than what you would normally expect, but if you get called, then just make it bigger. You could even make it 45 maybe. In this case, 40 did the job. We got a caller. Queen 7-3 looks fine, definitely going for a range bet pretty much anyway. multiway, and with this hand I want to get some value in. Now this is a pretty big bet, and I think in GTO terms this is fine, and I think I don't mind a big bet either. Just be aware that if you get check raised with such a big bet, you might have to fold aces sooner rather than later. But here in this case we get called, and the deuce of diamonds, as bricky as it gets, definitely continuing for value. There are still hands, like lots of queen x hands, that will call. Maybe jacks 10s won't believe us either. Now you could just go for the check behind and hope that he will then call a river bet, which is more likely than the flop bet if you think that he's more like jacks through 8s heavy. But I think going for value here is also fine, and villain checks, hero also checks. And now on this river we face this tiny bet, 14 to 203, and to me this doesn't scream value. To me this screams I might have pocket jacks and I just want to get called by maybe ace king or so, maybe even a queen. So what I would definitely do at this point is raise this hand. However, if you raise this hand and you then get jammed on, this changes the situation completely. And this is exactly what's happening here. So we make it 125. I do like the size. So far I'm actually quite happy with Hero's play. But this is what I said. Now villain jams to 300. And now we have to think what he would do this with. So would he do this with ace queen? I mean, maybe, but I think most likely not, because most recreational players would just be afraid that you have aces or kings or queens here or 10s even. So that's why I don't think ace queen would do that. No other queen x hand would do it, except maybe queen 10, but that's 2 pair and beats you. Pocket kings is a possibility. He might have slow played that and he thinks that he's doing this for value now. That said, you might still have pocket queens, pocket aces, pocket 10s. So even pocket kings, I think, would just call here. And that means that he would have to have a bluff, because now our aces are nothing but a bluff catcher. So what bluffs does he have that he called a big flop bet and then bet small on the river and then jammed once we raised his small bet? And I frankly don't see any. Like, what would that be? Pocket 8s, pocket 9s, pocket jacks? Would he turn those into such a bluff? I mean, it's not completely out of this world, but almost. I just don't see a recreational player do that. So honestly, I do not see any weaker hand doing this, and I do not see a bluff that he could have, which means we are just dead in this spot. Hero called and he lost to a set of 7s. Now villain played this quite funkily. He waited until the river to get his money in, but I'm not surprised. A lot of players at these stakes are terrified of losing their customer, so they're slow playing this. And that's why it happened the way it happened. But I think on the river, this was the only mistake in the hand. Until then, I think the hero played it very well. But the call on the river, once we raised and got jammed on, was a clear mistake. Okay, we talked about kings, we talked about aces, now we have queens. And this one is a typical live game. It's a 1-3, there's a limp, another limp, and a third limp, and a fourth limp, and a fifth limp, and now the small blind, who is short stacked with only 100, jams. Easiest call in the world, right? No, hero folds pocket queens. Okay, so yes, if a player goes all in pre-flop, pocket queens are often not the best hand. However, what I normally mean when I say queens are not the best hand when someone jams pre-flop is when you're quite deep, which you're not in this case, and actually if there are a few bets going on. So if villain raises, we 3-bet, then villain 4-bet jams, or even 5-bet jams in a scenario or so. Then I would be very careful with queens, then you're most likely dead. But this here, I mean, if I were to range villain, I would say this is anything from, could even be pocket fives, pocket sixes, could be ace king, ace queen, ace jack, king queen, king jack, queen jack suited, maybe even 10-9 suited if he's a maniac. I mean, there are a million hands, but what I don't think it's aces or kings, because he would then be afraid to lose his customer. So we can't rule out aces or kings, but it seems unlikely. And for $100, I go broke all day, every day in this scenario. I will just call here because I think we are probably in somewhere around 70 to 75% equity here, and I would never ever fold. So this is clearly a mistake, and I hope that Hero learns from this. Just don't make the wrong, don't draw the wrong conclusions, because yes, sometimes queens are not great against an all-in, but that doesn't mean against a small all-in that just jams to pick up, what is it, 12, 18, $19, to jam 99 to win 19. That's not super strong in my mind, and therefore this is absolutely a call. Okay, this is another limp pot. So pretty much everybody limps, or everybody limps. We're in the big blind with a7 offsuit. I would normally just check my option, but if you do want to raise this one up, if you're pretty confident that the initial limper is not a tricky limper who will check raise you, then you can go, but you have to go quite big here with a raise. You have to make it, what do we have, 14 in there, so probably like 30 or 35 even to be almost guaranteed to get folds all around. Hero made it 25, which I think is a little bit too small. You will definitely get some callers. We actually only get one caller here, but it is the second limper. And now on 10-5-3, we're out of position. I'm not loving it. We go 45 into 60. I think this is way too big. We're out of position. We've bloated the pot with ace high. And also, yes, he might have a hand like Queen Jack or King Jack or so, or 9-7 suited that he will fold now, but he would probably have folded that one to a smaller bet as well, and I just don't really love this one. If we get called, I would definitely just give up, because there is nothing we can do. Now, the 10 pairs here, we did get called, and now Hero does the sensible thing, checks, and now Villain bets. It only bets 50 into 150, but I'm just done with my ace high at this point. But not Hero. Hero goes for the check raise, now really wrapping the 10, and yeah, you have to just wonder whether Brian here will really believe you in this spot. I mean, first of all, he might well have a 10, or even better, he might have pocket 3s, pocket 5s. And if he has a hand like pocket 9s or pocket 8s, 7s, 6s, yes, you will potentially get those to fold, but I'm not even entirely sure about that. You will have to fire a big river bet, and the problem is you don't have a lot left. There's 180 left. If he calls here, there will be 450 in the pot. You have 180 left. That's basically nothing. That's just a little more than third pot. So you will not be able to get him off whatever he has. So that's why I don't think this is a great play. If we were deeper, I would like it a little more, but even then I don't love it, because the 10 is a lot in his limping range. So here he calls us, the river is a jack, and at least now Hero gives up, and Brian bets 100 and Hero finally folds. But I think we just spewed quite a bit of money in this hand that just wouldn't have been necessary. Okay, so this is similar scenario, same player. This time it's a 1-2, and we have a raise to 5. We have ace queen offsuit on the button. I definitely like a 3-bet here. That's great. The size is also fine to 16. But now we get 4-bet to 40. Now this is player dependent. If you know that this is someone who does it with a light hand, then you can call or even jam. Against more passive and tighter players, this is already quite borderline, but in GTO terms, it's fine to call here. It is cutoff versus button, so I don't mind to see the call, which is what Hero does. And again, it's a similar flop to the hand before, 10-4 deuce, rainbow. We don't have much going for us, and now our opponent makes it 20 into 84, and this is borderline again. I mean, you could call in the hope to either improve or then take it away if he has ace king, but that's pretty much the only hand really, unless you did that with something like ace 5 suited or so, or ace 9 or ace jack or so in that case. But in those cases you are ahead anyway. But with all that said, I think here I would definitely call when he makes it small. He should make it small. Quarter pot, that's fine, although I think GTO sometimes jams on these boards in a 4-bet pot, but that's a different story. Anyway, we call and I'm okay with that. Now the 8 of clubs and we get check 2, and at this point I'm thinking we might have the best hand if he bluffed before, or he could have ace king, or he's slow playing something like jacks through aces, but seems a little unlikely at this point because he would want to get money in. We're still quite deep. There's more than a pot size bet, and I don't know if he would want to jam the river as an overbet, so he might want to continue betting small. I would like to put in a bet here and then just jam the river. I think at this point we have a chance of getting him to fold ace king, but it's basically only ace king because any other hand that was a bluff or still is there as a bluff, that will beat that one. So that's why I'm kind of in two minds, but I don't mind the small bet at all because we will probably get called. The only thing is, if you bet small on this turn, you have to bet the river as well. You have to jam the river, otherwise you will get called by ace king here, and then you will not be able to get that hand to fold. So, and now on this river, that's exactly what we do. We jam and we get the fold. So I don't mind the way Hero played this hand. I'm not entirely sure if this was necessary, but I still think it was actually good, not wanting to be result orientated. I think this was definitely played much better than the previous hand. Okay, last hand, and I really like this one. So now we're playing a 100, 200, 400 with a straddle. There is a call, and we make it 2,400 with ace queen off. That's 6 times the straddle. There is a limper. I would probably go slightly smaller simply because we have 3 players in position behind us, but I don't mind wanting to isolate these players with a good hand to go quite big, so it's okay. But here, this is what I meant. Hijack now calls us, so we don't have position, and also everybody and their dog call us, so we go 5 ways to a flop where we have top pair. It checks to us, and I could go either way. It depends a bit on your opponents. I'm happy to go for a small bet here and then proceed cautiously, but I'm okay with checking as well and just see what the next card brings and play it quite passively. This is what Hero does. It checks through. Now there is a 9 there, and this player bets 3 into 15, the big blind. So at this point we could call, but when he bets so small, I just don't think he has a set, because now there are draws out there. There's a flush draw and a straight draw. Actually, the straight is already there with Jack 10. I don't think he has Jack 10 or a set, so I'm happy to raise here and potentially get called by a weaker queen or a 9 or so. So this is what Hero does. Very happy with that. And now we get jammed on, and this one is quite tricky because on the one hand you have 5 players in this pot, so it's not unlikely that one of them will actually have a big hand. But on the other hand, the conflicting information is that this guy just bet the flop really small. Yes, maybe he just wanted to induce something with a set or 2 pair, but also we're not super deep, so we have to call, what is that, 44? Yeah, okay, we're not even getting 2-1 quite, but 35% of the time that he maybe has a flush, so I think that's something that could also be maybe even a combo draw, maybe 10-9 of hearts or so. And yes, against that hand, actually, we're not a massive favorite, but we are a favorite, and that could play like that. He was trying to get to see a cheap river. When that plan didn't work out, said, okay, well, I might as well jam. So that could be it. I think I would call here. I would expect to probably lose at least half of the time, but we only need to be good about 37% of the time or so, which means that I'm okay to call this river, and calling is what Hero did, and he was shown 7 deuce offsuit. Wow. Okay, so I'm not sure if they played the 7 deuce game here or so, but very bizarre. And yeah, please let me know where you played this, because I might book a flight to play there if this is what happens in your game. I hope you learned something from these hands, and if you want to know how to crush recreational players, then click on the video here.